All right, so today we are taking a deep dive into something that's um, always guaranteed to get people talking,
Yeah.
open borders.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're really going to be looking at, you know, what a world without immigration restrictions would actually look like.
Yeah.
And we're going to be drawing on insights from a couple of different sources to help us get there.
Okay.
We've got an economics paper and also a work of philosophy.
Interesting.
So we're going to be looking at things from both of those angles.
Nice.
And really the big questions that we're trying to grapple with here are, what are the potential benefits?
Yeah.
What are the potential drawbacks of a policy like this?
Right.
And then also thinking about, who stands to gain and who might stand to lose.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought experiment because it forces us to kind of examine like the very foundation of how we organize ourselves as nations and like what happens when you remove these traditional barriers of citizenship and geography.
Yeah. And one of the most compelling arguments that you always hear in favor of open borders is that this idea that it could really supercharge the global economy.
Right.
If companies can recruit from absolutely anywhere, it's like they're building this ultimate dream team, right? This like all-star roster.
Totally.
And you can imagine that leading to just this massive surge in innovation and productivity.
Well, and economist Michael Clemens,
Yes.
in his paper, $1 trillion Bills on the Sidewalk.
Oh, I love that title.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
He argues that basically we're leaving so much potential, economic potential, just untapped by restricting labor mobility.
Yeah.
And he uses this really powerful analogy of it's like there's all this money lying around.
Oh, I see.
But we're just choosing not to pick it up.
Interesting.
Think about it. If you have this brilliant software developer who's living in a country where the opportunities are limited, they could easily move to like Silicon Valley or some other kind of tech hub. Right.
And suddenly their skills would be put to much greater use.
Yeah.
And it would benefit both them and the global economy.
Okay. But doesn't that then lead to this really fierce competition in job markets?
Yeah.
Especially for people who are already living in these like developed countries.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, some people would definitely argue that it's a recipe for like a race to the bottom when it comes to wages.
Right.
Everybody's trying to undercut each other.
Right, exactly. And I think that is something that a lot of people would struggle with, right?
For sure. I mean, that's like a trade-off. That's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Clemens acknowledges that in his paper.
Does he?
Yeah, he says that, like, look, the benefits from open borders wouldn't be distributed evenly.
Right.
And it's important to think about how we can kind of mitigate the negative impacts on certain groups. Like maybe there needs to be some kind of safety net.
Or retraining programs or something like that.
Yeah, some kind of adjustment to kind of account for those differences, yeah.
Right, to make sure that it's a just transition,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so speaking of winners and losers, let's talk about culture for a minute.
Okay.
Because I think we can all agree that open borders would lead to a much more diverse world, right?
Yeah, definitely.
All sorts of languages and customs and traditions. I mean, I imagine it would be so enriching, like a global festival every day.
It'd be pretty amazing.
But then on the other hand, couldn't this also lead to like clashes and tensions between different groups?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we can look at the Schengen area in the European Union as a real world example of this. Like it's definitely promoted trade and tourism and cultural exchange.
Right.
But it's also seen a rise in nationalist sentiments and anxieties about cultural identity.
Yeah.
Especially during times of economic hardship.
Right. So it's not all like sunshine and roses. It's not all just...
No, I mean, it seems like integration requires more than just open borders. It requires like conscious effort to build understanding and cohesion,
So a more diverse world might come with some growing pains, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you think societies could actually navigate this potential for both enrichment, but also division?
I mean, I think we could learn a lot from the successes and failures of the Schengen area.
Yeah.
Like looking at the EU's challenges, it's clear that open borders alone aren't a magic solution.
Yeah.
Like integration requires investment,
And what kind of things?
Well, things like language programs,
Okay.
intercultural education.
Makes sense.
And then maybe even social safety nets to alleviate some of those economic anxieties that can lead to division.
Right.
It's complex. It requires thoughtful policies and, societal commitment.
Right. It has to be something that everybody buys into. Okay. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the ethical side of this.
Okay.
Because open borders raise some really fundamental questions about our moral obligations to each other.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to offer refuge to people who are fleeing conflict or persecution. I mean, that's a powerful argument in favor of open borders.
Yeah. I mean, Joseph Cairns writes about this in his book, The Ethics of Immigration.
Okay.
And he argues that affluent nations actually have a moral duty to open their borders. And he challenges this whole idea of citizenship as being like this privileged club with these like arbitrary entry requirements. And he asks us to consider, like, is it really fair that someone's life chances are so drastically determined by where they happen to be born?
It's a really compelling argument, but some people would say that a country also has a duty to protect its citizens and that open borders could pose security risks. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, that's the real balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we can see this tension playing out right now in a lot of the immigration debates that are happening, especially in the U.S., where concerns about security are often pitted against this desire to offer humanitarian aid.
Okay.
And Cairns would argue that a lot of those security concerns are exaggerated.
Okay.
And that there are ways to address them without having to resort to these really restrictive border policies.
So it sounds like what we're saying is that open borders present us with these incredible opportunities, but also these really significant challenges.
For sure.
And it requires us to kind of rethink some fundamental assumptions about nations and citizenship and to grapple with these really complex ethical and practical considerations.
Exactly. I mean, open borders aren't just about economics or even culture.
It's bigger than that.
Yeah, they're about reimagining how we relate to each other.
Yeah.
On a global scale.
On a global scale, yeah.
Like, it's a really thought-provoking concept that forces us to ask some tough questions.
For sure.
About our values and priorities.
And that's exactly what makes this such a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
It's not about finding easy answers.
Yay.
It's about exploring the complexities of a globalized world and really considering all these different perspectives.
For sure.
So as you continue to learn about this topic, I want to leave you with a question.
Okay.
If you were crafting immigration policy for a nation, what would your top 3 priorities be?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Would you focus on economic growth, cultural exchange, humanitarian aid, security?
Tough choices.
Yeah. And how would you balance those often competing goals?
It's a tough one, yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.